you everyone for being here, and special thank you to our panelists today. Just as I'm going to give a very, very brief introduction of our panelists, and as they kind of get into some of our presentation here, they may chime in with a little bit more to give you a little bit more background. But today with us, we've got Rebecca Talbert, AIA, John Clark, AIA, Don Yoshino, FAIA, Jeff Huber, FAIA, again, Adam Gale, AIA, Melissa Daniel, Associate AIA, and Wesley Keene has joined us here, AIA. Not with us today are Nathan Butler, FAIA, and Martin Diaz-Yabor, FAIA. They will be part of this part 2 that's going to happen at convention. So, we certainly will miss them here today, but they're going to be part of this as well. And so the reason for the quick introductions is because we want to get into the meat of the presentation here. And really, just to give everybody a quick overview of how we're going to go about this, is that this is really going to be a conversation about kind of honor awards in general. And at convention, there will be a part 2 that will start to dive into a little bit more specifics, like the Fellowship Award or Young Architect or Associates Award. So we will, of course, be addressing all of those awards and others on today's call, but it's more of a general conversation about how do we build an awards ecosystem. And so the first 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about building an awards ecosystem, talking about mentorship tips and tricks. The next 20 minutes of the presentation, we'll get into a little bit more specifically, how do we overcome the barriers of entry? How do we tell our story compellingly in order to apply for these sorts of awards? And then the last 20 minutes, we're reserving for question and answer. And thank you all for filling out the survey when you registered for this. We've got a whole bunch of your questions already queued up, but feel free at any time to interject, put things in the chat, and we will try to address everyone's questions as they come in the Q&A session. So with that, I'm going to kick us into our presentation here. And I want to start with Mr. Jeff Huber and just ask the question, we're talking about AIA Awards, tips and tricks. How do we build that AIA Florida awards ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think it's going to be an engaging conversation today, but where I wanted to just kind of start is, I believe we need to leverage those who have previously won these honors, and to become the mentors to basically steward and cultivate the next awardees. I mean, things like today's session, I believe, do start to help establish this, but we really need to identify AIA Florida, and even at our local chapters, members and folks even within our own firms, as well as individuals we admire that can champion members within these chapters to basically meet with them and look over the criteria of these awards. And, this could be, as well as simply identifying those interested and that are also currently applying to these awards. We need to create resources and a system for both, at the state and I think at the local chapters. And so that's really the intent of today, is to kind of how do we begin to think about that, start that. We need to set up potentially even mock juries at AIA Florida, I believe, with AIA Florida members that are seeking to submit and identify any shortfalls or how to help build the case, or sometimes let the applicants know that the case may not be strong enough, but how do we assist them in giving them the tools, how to better tell their story, or what other activities they may need to kind of build upon to build that case. I mean, this is essentially what New York, California, Texas, Massachusetts do. And this is why you always see these states having the most individuals receiving these honors. And so we need to invest in our members, and those members seeking these awards need to reach out and not feel isolated or insecure about, remaining confidential. I think that's why we wanted to have this today, because we understand that that's sometimes a limiting factor, but everyone I know that has won these honors has had a champion or even a group of people supporting them. I had Don Yoshino as my nominator for fellowship. He was an incredible nominator, incredible member. We all know Don, and I know he'll share some of his thoughts today, but he pushed me to the best of my abilities, and really kind of we all need somebody like that. And so what we're trying to do is identify that system that can help to establish this across AIA Florida.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I really appreciate that response. And it is, it's really refreshing to hear it's not so much about how do we apply for just one award or how do we build up to one thing, but how do we build this bigger AIA Florida, collection of mentorship, of talent, of people who are applying and receiving these awards. So I really like that. And you mentioned mentorship, and you also mentioned Don Yoshino by name here. So Don, I want to get your take on this, but when Jeff says mentorship, what does that mean to you? And not just, how do you mentor somebody, but how can you be a mentee as well? Can you talk about how that goes both ways?
Well, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Jeff, for those kind words. But you know what it is really, when even and it all starts at the chapter level, I think, and as a young member, emerging professional, whatever, you can start to show yourself by just joining committees, just getting involved with various things, not only at the chapter level. I mean, that's the first step, of course, and then go to the state level. But they're asking for volunteers at the national level for joining committees. So just if you're interested in a certain specific thing, go and sign up for that. You can learn so much from just being involved. You don't have to be the leader of any of those groups, but you can start to gain the knowledge and all of that. And then what happens? Next thing you'll say, oh, this is something I'm interested in, and then take it from there. But I think what will happen is, and there probably someone in your local chapter or component that you feel like that they've been led, they've won awards, and so go and talk to them. Just say, look, I admire the process and the progress that you've made with all these awards, and then start with that. And those people become your mentors, because they can help you. They know what the process is. They've been through it. And so that mentorship is so important in every particular person that you see. Another example beside Jeff is Dan Kirby, that I mentored. I saw in my corner of my eye, there's a spark or leadership in that individual. So he wanted, and I thought he would be a good leader for AIA Florida. So he was thinking about running for vice president at the AIA Florida. And he called me at the last minute and said, "No, Don, I'm not ready to do that." And I said, "Dan, put your name in. You are a leader. You can do this." And so he immediately said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And I said, "Don't be ashamed if you don't win. I mean, that's okay. Then people know who you are." So anyway, that's how he started. And so I think it's just someone in your local component can already, they can see who's going to be the leaders of your component. And from that, go for that and get that person, talk to them, get in their head, see what they do. How do they do this? Blah, blah, blah. It's simple. And they'll be more than happy to help you, I'm sure. So anyway, that's a quick comment on that, Adam.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned it is sometimes as simple as just starting a conversation with somebody in your chapter, or joining a committee and starting a conversation there. For the times where it's not that simple. And I failed to mention earlier that all of the panelists on this call have applied for and received several of these honor awards. So, we're speaking from experience here on this panel. And Melissa, I'd be really curious to hear, your perspective of finding a mentor, or, tips and tricks to kind of start some of those dialogues that Don was talking about.
Thanks, Adam. Finding a mentor is twofold. One, you could already have a mentor and you just haven't labeled them a mentor. They could be a friend, they could be a coworker, they could be someone that you serve on a committee with. Like, the title, don't get intimidated about the title of mentor or mentee, as a matter of fact. You can work, for example, in the name of sponsors, right? Like the term of someone sponsoring you at work, or you being a sponsor yourself, whether it's looking at an individual who you work with as a group or whomever, and you just connect, or you see them as a bright star, or you see someone in a leadership position that you are interested in becoming. And I'm using mentor mentee interchangeably because throughout the course of your professional career, you were a mentee, and as you grow into the professor, you become a mentor. And even as a mentor, you have mentees. Like it's really interchangeable. It's amazing how that works. So throughout my architectural career, I've served as both, and some I've seeked out because there's something about them that I aspire to be. And and that doesn't mean that we're best friends, or it's strictly, it could be a business bestie. Like I like to title that as someone who is in the profession, who is that you admire their business ethics. So it's really it's so like loosey goosey. I like to call it, in terms of the mentor and mentee relationship.
Awesome. Thank you. And Rebecca, I'm curious if you've got any other kind of mentorship tips that you can share too.
Sure. Much like Don and Melissa said, um, really the first thing is you don't have to have one mentor. You'll have many people that will give you advice, and be there to bounce ideas off of, in many different aspects of what you're looking for. So really, when you're seeking a mentor, look for someone who inspires you or has some quality that you aspire to have. Don't be afraid to ask. The answer is always no if you don't ask. But with that, have a specific ask. Obviously, people are busy. And so when you go to them, really have something initially specific that you're asking. Perhaps it's, hey, if it's someone you work with or know professionally, I have this issue, I'd love your perspective on. Can I buy you a coffee, or can we have a quick virtual meeting? Just so that the person kind of understands what you're, that it's not just open, hey, will you be my mentor? That's a little overwhelming and doesn't give guardrails. So initially, when you're reaching out, especially to someone that you've never met, if you just ping them on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'd love, I saw this article where you got this award, and you had involvement in this organization. I'd love to hear more about how you got involved, or if they're on a city board, like how, ask them, how did you, how were you able to get in that position? It's something I'd like to do one day, and I'd love to learn about that. Something very specific that you could cover in a short conversation, and that helps build the relationship. And then from there, just stay in touch, and that's really how you build your professional network, and a whole network of mentors around you. And then, like everyone said, be willing to do that for others when you see something in someone. Encourage them, suggest that they apply for awards, or get involved in something, and pay it forward always.
Right on. So specific asks, guardrails, and practicing forward. I like it. That's good advice. One last question on mentorship, and John, I'm going to look to you for this because you had experience practicing in another state, applied for Young Architects Award, are now part of AIA Florida. We're so happy to have you. But when you were applying, and even kind of before and after, just as part of this ecosystem of awards, did you look to former award winners or people who had applied in the past?
Yeah, definitely, Adam. So it was a combination of kind of working with others that were applying. So we had a cohort of people in a similar mindset that were applying for awards that could give that extra motivation as you went through the process, continued encouragement. But then we also look back at past winners, because through that, especially for the national awards, through the AIA archives, you can request the previous successful submissions for Associates Award, Young Architects Award, and I believe for Fellowship also. So it was just a matter of reading the blurbs on the AIA website, seeing who we resonated with, particularly with our career path or our AIA service or our specific architectural sector which we worked. And then we requested the applications from the archives and then reached out if necessary as a extra layer of mentorship. And in most cases, those people weren't where I was from in Albuquerque. So that gave another layer of like national reach and exposure in mentors, which I think is important, especially when you're applying for awards. I don't think there's a disqualifier if all your recommendations or nominators come from your component or state, but I think it is helpful when you're able to show a bit of a national reach and impact if you have letters of recommendation or a nominator from a entirely different component or state.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a really good point. You know, there are these awards that happen in your local component, at the state level, at a national level. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You know, Jeff, can you expand on that a little bit about how these awards do really complement each other and kind of inform each other?
And I'm assuming that's a compliment with an E and not an I.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, I mean, there are many. And I think what we have to really do is understand at the local level, each chapter does have its own honor awards typically, and those may have different kind of aspects. And then, you know, we also have that, you know, some submissions or some may require a submission, some may not even require a submission for these honor awards at the local level. You know, when we get to the state level, there are many different ones that we can see, like, you know, from the state, from AI Florida, the Polara, the silver medal, the gold medal. I mean, you have all these others, but then, you know, obviously, you know, when you start to look at the national, you start to look at young architects, you have the associates awards, you have the fellowship for elevation. And you know, the one thing that I would always say is when I'm looking and I sit on a few different juries for these honor awards, it's interesting because a lot of the ones that are the most successful actually are utilizing the national AIA format, you know, and so what's interesting now is that AIA national has kind of began to at least somewhat align the associates to the young architects to the fellowship. And so look at that kind of submission criteria, look at how that is formatted, because I believe that can help drive, you know, some of your ability to start laying out the context, or at least the criteria and the content for your own honors award submissions within these others. And, you know, that's one of the things I would say is I wish the state and local chapters could, you know, somewhat adopt that national kind of standard as a way to kind of ease these kind of efforts and take on the similar portfolio and submission strategies. I mean, even regarding non-AIA, I mean, you see these, you know, other types of awards, and whether they be community service based ones or whether they be, you know, just service based, whether it be professional awards, also happening at the local and state levels. And I think, you know, again, I see all these kind of having similar kind of ways in which they approach. And, you know, that's the one thing I can say is being a young architect award recipient, and I know Rebecca could say this too, when we both submitted, there was no criteria. It was almost open-ended. And quite frankly, when I submitted for the McMinn, there was no criteria except for, you know, you have to be an educator with the, you know, this criteria, and you have to be nominated, right? That's typically a part of the processes in any of these, is you need to be nominated. And so those kind of aspects are always very, you know, you know, this mentor comment that we're having before, identifying who will be your nominator is just as critical as who is your mentor. And they don't necessarily have to be the same person. But I think too, it's also how do you begin to formulate your content, your submission packages for these, and kind of starting to establish a portfolio for that just begins to ease the process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to speed us along in our agenda a little bit, but I do just want to reiterate the importance of how these awards really do inform each other. And, you know, it starts, submit unbuilt work for, you know, AIA Florida and your local component, do your local design awards. And then, you know, you've received a couple of those and you're building your resume, and now you're submitting for things at the state level, and now you're national. And so that resume just starts to build itself, and that can go to any of these awards. So I think that's a really astute point. I want to shift the conversation a little bit now to talk about some of the resources that are out there. And Wesley Keene is AIA Florida's most recent Young Architect Award recipient. Congratulations, Wesley. But since you're the most recent, we wanted to ask you, what were some of the resources that you utilized while you were putting together your submission packet?
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I haven't even received it yet, so I'm still sort of glowing with optimism on this call. I know it's a big hurdle, and I just wanted to say that for those of you that are with us, like you're already taking the biggest leap. So congratulations to you all for making that step, and I think you're on your way. We talked a lot about mentorship. That's obviously was a huge resource for me when I started my journey on Young Architect Award. It was at a conference, Florida State Conference. Rebecca, John, and Jeff were speaking at a panel, and I sort of joined it because it sounded interesting, but they were talking directly to the audience and saying, I see some people who deserve to win it in this audience, and I don't think they were speaking to me, of course, but it felt like they were. And so that was motivating. And so joining these kinds of calls, those kinds of conference events are huge resources in and of themselves. And they stem from there to develop mentors. I know that Jeff worked really closely with me. I know John was also helpful. So the mentorship is really key. Looking at past employers, professors, friends in the industry were also great resources, mentors. But more specifically, and I'm happy to share these in the link or in the chat, the national chapter has specific email addresses that were really, really helpful for me. One in particular was, I wrote it here, archives@aia.org. And there I was able to obtain, past winners and what their submission packages look like, so that I could analyze those against what I was doing. Obviously through John, Rebecca, and Jeff, I was able to get theirs more directly, but even beyond them, other states, so on and so forth, that email address was really helpful. And then there's one called honorsawards@aia.org, which really helped with the kind of rules and procedures and more technical aspects of the submission. As I was putting it together, there'd be very specific questions that, you don't want to break the rules. You worked so hard on this submission package that you want to try to keep it tight and organized. So they were really great with clarifying rules and those kinds of things. And then there were helpful webinars, much like this one, that walk you through the process and at the state conferences, national conferences, going like the one we're going to hold in a couple weeks or a couple months, go there, ask questions, bring your submission with you, like pin us down, have us sit with you. I know that I'm meeting with somebody for lunch next week who's working on one. So, one thing I've learned about us architects is we love awards and we love mentorship. So really leverage that and take advantage of those relationships as much as you can.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, there's clearly a common thread between mentorship and past honorees and just all of these things being tied together. So that's great. And yes, those honored awards email addresses are awesome resources. They typically get back to you pretty quickly. Sometimes during award season, it can be a little bit longer of a response time, but it's still usually within a couple of days. So great advice there. Really quickly, I'm just going to share my screen to show everybody. The AIA has an awards and honors website, and it's got really all of their excellence awards kind of in one place. And if you scroll down, and you probably just Google, but aia.org/design-excellence/awards, and they're all here. And you can click on any of these, whether it's fellowship, Young Architects Award, and it'll take you to that specific award. And like Wesley was mentioning, it usually gives you kind of the overview of requirements to apply for the award. It will give you the dates when things are going to happen, the cost, who's going to be on the jury, other resources. It gives you information of people you can contact, reach out to. And then, of course, look at that smiling face right there. It gives you, the previous year's award winners. So all of that information is on the site, and it gets updated throughout the year. Again, as you get closer to kind of awards season, they will update that award. Sometimes the jury isn't selected even until after you've submitted. So not all of the information is always there, but that's really kind of the first step of places to go look. So I want to pivot now into a little bit of tips and tricks for applying for these awards. And I think, Wesley, you hit on one of the most crucial things, and that's just following instructions. I mean, I've seen some of these calls where they say you can use up to 18 pages, and then further down it says, but your submission can only be 17 pages. And it's like, wait, what do I do? And so,
Right.
being able to clarify and know that you're not submitting a page that's not going to be counted or that's going to disqualify you is hugely important. And Rebecca, I'm curious, what tips and tricks do you use when you are preparing for, any or all of these awards?
Sure. Well, it starts with just having the information on hand, and lots of information to choose from. So just a few tips in general that I think will set you up for success, to prepare you for any of these type of awards is really just make a habit of, once a year kind of doing a review of your goals and your achievements over the past year, looking back at, what you achieved professionally, what you found interesting professionally that you got involved with, and then kind of look ahead to the year ahead and set some goals for yourself. We all get busy with work and life, and eventually in our careers, we learn we have to say no to some things and be a little more strategic about how we spend our time. So it's really good to make time to kind of set those goals, and it will start to clarify for yourself, really where your passions are and where your strengths are, which will help you in formulating, kind of the story that you are telling about your career. And then just file information. Every time you do something, if you complete a project and you get the cut sheet, filled out for the project page, file that. If you get a kudos email or, or someone gives you a compliment, a client, save that email so that if you need a quote in the future or someone to write a recommendation or a letter of support, you can say, hey, you were happy with this project, and you can kind of refer back to that email or have that quote handy. So just keep a file folder somewhere and kind of organize it by year or however, and just track this. Take photos, try and capture all of that. When you're participating in something, take photos because you need documentation, and just like action photos of you participating. So for me, I always have a photo buddy. There is another architect, Holly Stenger, in our chapter, and we've served on the board together locally at the state. We've participated. We usually go to conference together. So we sort of do that for each other, and we kind of agree, hey, when I'm doing this, will you take a picture, and vice versa. So it's good to have a partner that you guys are supporting each other to kind of document your story.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I personally do all of those things. And sometimes I even will take it to a next step. Like I've got just a Google Doc, basically like a Word file that literally anytime, in a Word or I'm on a panel or something like that, I can just open it up anywhere there's internet and I can punch it in, and it's there. It's a running list, and it's got projects I've worked on. I even keep things like mission and vision and bio, because how many times do you have to send your bio to somebody, and just to be able to have versions of it all in one document that you can kind of quickly pull from is tremendously useful. And then you mentioned the photos and a photo buddy. If you're unable to find a photo buddy, you can set up filters in Gmail that will like automatically tag your emails for you. And so if it's a photo, you just put AIA photos in the subject line, and it'll automatically direct it into a place where all of your photos are. So similarly, just so everyone's aware, AIA Florida, all the pictures that they take at convention and other events, they have those. And if you're looking for action shots of yourself, like, oh, I forgot to take that picture, if AIA Florida has it, it's very easy for them to search back in that event and pull that photo and get it to you. And I think just making sure that anytime you're applying for one of these awards, you're sort of keeping a mental clock too, just because the deadline is maybe 6 months out, or, if you're really planning the long game, I'm going to apply next year, that comes up quick, and it's a lot of work to put some of these submissions together. And so, having that sort of deliverable timeline, just like we would a project, becomes really critical, because as you mentioned, when you're having to go ask for letters of recommendation or photo credits or things like that, if you don't already have it queued up, that can be, sometimes a wild goose chase. So I think those are all really important tips to just, really that can be used for any awards application, but, resumes, CVs, other applications as well. So Wesley, I want to circle back to something that you had said, and it was kind of that you were in the room and they were talking to you, but that can't be me. Like I can't apply for this award, but you did, and you won it. So how did you get into, being able to tell your story and put that package together and kind of break the barrier to entry?
Yeah, I thought so I mentioned, I went to that seminar, and I feel like, Rebecca, John, and Jeff did a really great job of demystifying it. So going into that, it was sort of like this, I could never do that. But slowly I realized that I could. And some of the things that were helpful was, as you mentioned, Adam, going to the website and just kind of seeing even the pictures of the people that had won, and realizing, what, these are my peers. These people look like me. They are similar age. And so that helped with motivation. But also, once I started to talk about it and tell people and reach out to a nominator, the amount of positive support and encouragement was really motivating and inspiring. And so as you start to ask for letters, and nobody likes to talk about themselves in that sort of egotistical way, but when other people do it for you, it's really motivating and inspiring. And so I remember after I finished my application, writing to Jeff and John and saying, no matter which way this goes, like, it was a really fulfilling process going through it, because it really justified all the hard work that I'm doing, and hearing from my peers and mentors in such a positive light was sort of enough for me. The award is great, and obviously it was great to hear, but the process can be really fulfilling, and it doesn't have to feel like a burden. The other thing that was helpful is, as I was going through it, our local chapter in Miami had their silver medal award submissions open, and I actually used the same application that I used for Young Architect for that, and ended up winning that, which was a huge honor. So, and then as I kept building it, it informed the work on our website and some of the narratives there. It's become a part of our sort of RFP process that we go for new work. So everything we do, I think it's beneficial to look at as not just singular, but how it can impact other aspects of what we're doing on a day-to-day life. I have the pleasure of having a firm, but even if you're working in a firm, what it can do for your resume, and just sort of cataloging all the incredible hard work we all do as architects is such a fulfilling and productive process. So that really, really helped me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And you mentioned impact, and that's something I think a lot of these awards really place an emphasis on, is what is the impact? What is the ripple effect? How is this, affecting people at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, outside of our profession? So Don, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, what is that sort of forward-looking mentality that you can take into these awards to really tell the story of that sort of impact or ripple effect?
Well, obviously the main thing, especially in fellowship, is getting, what is the ripple effect? And that's always the key question. So what's the ripple effect? And that's the first thing that I tell anybody that I'm talking to about getting a fellowship. But getting to that point of applying for fellowship, we're so many architects are so humble, and they don't want to brag about themselves. They don't want to say I'm the best, or I'm the greatest, or whatever. So I think if you see someone that you think is fellowship worthy, go to them and say, look, you're ready. Let's go for it, you know, and I'll help you, whatever, you know, I'll look at your submittal package, and being a former jurist, I always, you know, look at it from a jury standpoint, because the jury, as a jurist, you get 40 or so people that you have to look at. And what do you look at? And after looking at 2 or 3 of them, if it's all black and white text, you go, forget it. I'm not, you know, you don't have time to read every word. So what do they say about pictures? Pictures are worth 1,000 words or whatever. So remember, in any submittal package that you put in, it's the highlighting a specific thing, you know, what award it is, maybe a little picture. That tells immediately the juror that, oh, look, you know, this is what he's talking about. This is great. And then at least in fellowship, you have the ability to show all your work, but you have specific projects, exhibits that you want to highlight. So that's when you can go into a little more detail about what that project is about. But in general, even putting down, you were in an article, somebody mentioned you in an article in the newspaper. Well, you know, those are important. So you can put that in. If your picture is on the cover, that's even better. You'd show your picture. But all of those things, as you start to accumulate them, especially in fellowship, there's so many things that we do that you don't know which category you want to, you know, object that you want to go for. So all of us have done so many things as you get to that level of fellowship that you don't know if you want to go in best practice or design or social, you know, services society or whatever it is. Those are the hard choices, but it's because you've done all those things, you have a chance to choose that. But you're a sponsor or someone can help you with that. So, but I think the thing that's most important is to go to look at those previous winners. Go see what they've done and the format that they've used in putting their practice together. And that could be from any award, and going to the website and doing that. So I think it's and anytime that I've always said, what do you do in an elevator? You need to have your elevator speech, right? And we've been told this forever. How many times have you had an opportunity to say something, not necessarily bragging about yourself, but you can say, you know, I've done this, blah, blah, blah. And within 30 seconds, they'll get a good feeling for what you do, especially for clients. You need to go out and show a client that you're not a humble individual, that you're there and you're positive and all that. And so that whole thing is really important, and especially when you're submitting for fellowship. So, and any of you out there that are listening, and if you want me to come and talk to me, I'm more than glad to talk to you. And this panel is meant strictly for that. Any award. So let's. And last thing before I said my piece, I think we need to have a committee based on individuals like this panel that can talk to any of us and review all of it together, and a committee that can look at it to help and assist and direct whoever wants to go for an award.
Yeah, I mean, that really kind of ties a bow on creating that ecosystem, right? It's from the start all the way through the process and to the end. So it's a great way to kind of bring us to the conclusion of our content here. I do want to open up the floor to some Q&A, and as that comes in the chat here, I'd love for Melissa, just if there were any sort of roadblocks, you know, to just picking up the pencil, getting started, you know, can you share those with us and how you overcame them? And if we're still waiting, John, if you wouldn't mind following that up with how you tell your story, but also get that to kind of tell the story of others while you're doing it. So while we wait for questions to chime in here, Melissa, you mind sharing us some tips and tricks for just getting started, getting into it?
I think so for the AIA Associates Award, I think it was my second or third time applying. So it's you failed once, you're like, forget about it. I think overcoming that and understanding what you've done wrong initially. So when I first applied, and I didn't get it, I realized I had to be strategic, and I started to dissect the winners. Like what made them winners, right? Like were they in a specific committee that got, local attention or even national attention, national within the AIA. If it was national, then that was a totally different thing. But it was who are they? Like what were their titles or positions, or like I went into full investigative mode, and then I realized the first thing I realized was these people had more than one award and I had 0 awards. And so that's the first thing I did was my local chapter, I won that award, Emerging Architects Award. And then I was like, okay, I have one down, and that kind of snowballed into going after other awards that was even outside of AIA. So if there's any Florida-based awards that's outside of AIA, for example, Building Design magazine has a 40 on the 40 award, and I went after that and I received that. So it's really starting off with little things to make a bigger impact. Another thing that I did was I noticed that others started something. They started a committee, brand new committee, or they led an existing committee. So if you're whether it could be COAT, could be any type of emerging programs, you can even start something new. It could be like affordable housing, it could be anything that you may be passionate about that you may not be working on at work. It could be a work award. If you work for a large firm, whether Gensler or HOK or any other large firms that have internal awards, you can go after that and include that too. And there really isn't a limit of, even if you're even if you won a 5K, like that's an award, right? Like, or like you placed or something, like that's an award. It doesn't necessarily have to be an AIA award, but it could be something that you're part of your storytelling, right? That you've won. So that's how I've overcome those hurdles, is by, okay, I failed. I shouldn't say failed, but I didn't win, or here's an opportunity to improve myself. How do I do that?
Yeah, that's great. It's one step, one award at a time. I think that's a lot of this conversation, and it's so cool to hear how you win one and then it informs another one that you go apply for, and just that snowball effect. And here we are. So that's great advice. And then it looks like we've got one question in here, but John, I want to hear from you really quick just on that, how do you tell your story and kind of the outward story? And then Bryce will pick up your question here after that.
I think Rebecca kind of touched on the most important part for me for telling my story was just figuring out who you are. I guess I'm kind of the person that throws a lot of things out there and see what sticks. But applying for the award, even just considering the award, really helped me to hone in what I wanted to focus on in my career and in my service to the AIA, and just really helped focus me professionally. So that, I think that's a start of how to tell your story. So for me personally, I was focused like on a communications and storytelling service to the AIA, and then community-based design work. And from there, then telling the story of others, it comes down to the ripple effect and the impact that Don and a lot of others have noted. But I like visuals, so I use maps, I use big graphics. I try to aggregate the data where I could. So, working in affordable housing, how many homes have I helped create already, or how many in the pipeline? How much rent savings is there? How much utility savings is there? The communication side with Young Architects Forum, having a map of where I've interviewed people, where I've featured people in the Young Architects Forum publication, and almost every state is colored in. I think those are very helpful visuals to show juries that since we're architects are visual people. So, but then also just like anecdotal stories of, if you design a building, what do the users say about that building? How is that impacting the users? Your service, what does that mean to the people behind you? And getting almost little sound bites that you can include in your recommendation that at least anecdotally speak to your impact and your I guess legacy is a big word, but we'll say impact.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. I mean, that really does explain how, you're saying here are my accomplishments, here are my contributions, but here's how it has affected, whether it's the occupants in the building or, the AIA at large, if you've interviewed somebody in almost every state. So that is really cool. It's a very effective way to both tell your story and the story of others. So, all right, we are officially going to get into question and answer here, and everybody please keep your questions coming either in the chat or in the Q&A tab here. But Bryce wants to know, if you apply at National and you don't get the award, do you go right back? Do you try again next year? Should you take longer to wait, reassess? And John, you want to run with that one?
Yeah, I was going to mention this earlier, is especially in fellowship, not everybody gets fellowship to first pass. And so what happens, right? So I think what happens is they have a session afterwards that they explain the staff explains why there was some negatives to your submittal or whatever. You take advantage of that, because maybe you applied in a different object that instead of the one that you are more qualified for in your submittal. You may be focusing on design, for instance, which everybody would love to have, but maybe it's more practice oriented or something like that. So make sure you listen to the comments, and don't feel like it's a failure and wait, because if you do, you can go back and the next year and submit on a different object. And, by taking advantage of the comments that were there, and because sometimes they'll say, and I know when we reviewed it, we used to say, we think this person is very qualified. However, we think the object is not correct. They should have supplied, we should have been in education or whatever. And that's simple thing to change. Get a couple more sponsor letters or recommendations from your professors or former students who have now become huge, have their own companies and things. I mean, that's a ripple effect that you need to have. So those are simple things and don't feel like you have to wait another period of time. You can go right back into next year and resubmit and feel proud about it, because you have more than one area of expertise.
Yeah, it's an iteration, right?
Right.
You just go right back. You take the comments, the criticism, improve. Probably don't just resubmit the exact same thing. I would see how you could tweak it, take advantage of any comments, mentor reviews, and then go right back there. I think that is really important. I want to ask the question. I'm going to kind of combine a couple of the questions we got from you all on the survey, but maybe Jeff and Rebecca, if you could speak to, are there any sort of best practices or strategies, that will help your application stand out from others when you go to submit?
Rebecca, you want to go first, or?
Well, I think really just being clear and consistent in your narrative. You can't just put everything you've ever done in an application, right? You need to prioritize what has, where you have your strongest case. And then be consistent throughout in terms of being focused on those, 2 to 3, 4 areas. Have your letters of recommendation also be aligned with, the areas of, or your strengths that you're trying to focus on. Within the actual submission, highlight keywords using a, bold text or bigger text or colored text in a way that visually makes it easy for the jurors to, when they're flipping through, to see that jump out on the page. And it should reinforce what's in your beginning statement. If you just kind of see that consistently throughout, it helps it stick in their mind and really strengthen what you're trying to do with all the supporting material you're including. Jeff?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to thread the needle through the
Mhm.
entire document. There has to be some sort of narrative there. It has to be clear, it has to be impactful, but this ripple effect and the impact also needs to talk about how is it a model to the profession? How does it go beyond you as an individual or even from the state level or even from a local or even a national or international level? To Rebecca's point about the letters, I think it's important to have a broad-based thinking of letters, depending on which award you're going after. But I remember, Don telling me, the letters need to come from across the nation. They need to come from across the United States and really talk about that regional impact, but also providing your letter writers with bullet points so they're not saying the same thing there because they only have one page to do it. That's a very hard thing. It goes back to Mark Twain's famous quote. I apologize for the long letter, but I didn't have enough time to write you a short one, right? You have to kind of help your letter writers. You have to help those sponsors. You have to help those nominators craft that narrative. And I would just say, to Rebecca's point again, it's like a lifestyle magazine. Look at a lifestyle magazine like Mark Magazine or these other that how you're the balance of text to the balance of images need to kind of read across there. So there's a layering of information. When somebody's a juror and they're looking at it, they can read like the header, right? And they don't have to read everything and they can kind of get it. They'll come back, and sometimes, we talked about this, before, but there's sometimes that kind of smell test you have to kind of pass through sometimes in these, because as Don's already mentioned, sometimes these jurors are looking at 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 applications. How do you stand out over that pack? That's going to be a kind of critical way to kind of think through these. And just to kind of lay it back out, and Don saying, go to a different object. But I would just say, this is what we're trying to do with this session is to impart that there is an ecosystem we're trying to bridge. There are mentors and mentees. We're here to help, and we want to inculcate that and cultivate that relationship within AIA Florida and hopefully bridging it down to the local chapters, which I know is there. And I know even Nati is mentioning in our chat here to making sure that we mention that there are other resources, especially for fellowship. But I think we're trying to build resources for all the other awards too, that are at your chapter level. Ask for comments, ask for critiques. That's really the most critical part of it. And I would just say, yeah, if you don't win the first time, as everybody said, keep reapplying. There is no kind of don't do it. But, to Einstein's, not to quote another, but to Einstein's quote of the definition of insanity, to, do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, it may need to, you're going to need to flush things out. You have a year between these, and it doesn't mean to kind of panic right before it's due, a week before it's due. You really need to kind of give the time to work through the design of these portfolios to help that narrative and give the time for the critique and feedback from others that you're looking for that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I know we got some questions and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them here, but I do want to reiterate, at convention, there are going to be breakouts that will allow us to more specifically dive into some of these honor awards and even some of these questions that we've got here. We had questions roll in about I'm a specialist. How do I present myself when I'm like really good at one thing, but not as good as some of the other things? And we had questions come in that were the opposite, that said, I'm such a generalist. There's nothing that I can say I'm an expert in, but I'm touching all these different facets of the profession. And so strategies for crafting your awards, application to really highlight why one or the other is important. And similarly, I think Jeff or Rebecca mentioned it, that balance of text to images, what it looks like. How do I write? Do I write in my stylistic voice or in the voice that I think a juror is going to want to hear? What's authentic, what's going to make for a stronger presentation. So really, in closing here, I know we've just got kind of a minute or two, but Wesley, I want to put you on the spot too, and just kind of thinking back, since you just went through this process, what was maybe kind of the one or two things you can point to as I felt like really strongly about including this, and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wanted to speak to that, and also around this idea of barrier to entry, because it's just like with design work, the hardest step is like the first pen stroke on the page. And my biggest recommendation that I did that I think would be helpful to most people is dive in, put it together. Like this thing is, I think, 17 pages. It seems overwhelming, but it's also highly formatted. You have to have your declaration of responsibility in a certain location. You have to have your resume. So you have the information, build it out. And if you don't have something, put a placeholder, use lorem ipsum or some sort of, and format it, because that's a big chunk of the battle is how do I want this thing to look and read? Rebecca made good comments about the use of color and bold font. Where do you want, because you don't have a lot of real estate to do it. So where do you want to do it? And bold something, take a step back, see how it reads. And also the reason that's important is because when we do meet at convention and have that breakout session, we can only get as far as the conversation we're having today without that information. But if there is something, we can respond and react to it and give more specific and targeted feedback. One thing that John was really helpful with me on, and he touched on it here, was what's the data? Like, it's one thing to say that you were impactful here, but what are the numbers? And my own experience at the time, I think, now I'm much more heavily involved in the local chapter, but at the time I was just sort of getting my feet wet. So I was really intimidated about, look, this is an AIA award. They're going to want to know how my impact on the AIA specifically. So since then I got much more involved, but I was able to take what I was involved in and extrapolate, impact data from that, and photos and key things and other things. Like we, during the pandemic, we used our 3D printer to print mask guards that had nothing to do really with the AIA or the profession directly, but was really impactful to the community. So, Melissa had brought up the idea of the 5K. So go beyond what you might be sort of thinking about, and also be authentic. I now I'm much more involved in the AIA, but at the time I wasn't, so I couldn't play up that aspect of my application as maybe some of the other elements. But I was also teaching at the time, and I was able to play that up. And so really be authentic in you, but also build it out. Like, jump in, go ahead, and it doesn't take long to put a rough draft of this 17-page document together, so that you can mark up, meet with your mentors, and get more specific and direct feedback on.
Right on. Well, thank you. So, take the first step, just get started, ask for help. We're going to put together an email that follows up. I think a lot of the links, some of the tips and tricks, I think some of our contact information will be in there. And, we really do collectively want to take not just the first step, but many steps in forming this AIA Florida ecosystem for the Honors Awards and for support of ourselves and our profession here in AIA Florida. So we are just a couple minutes over 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. We really appreciate you joining us today. And please don't be a stranger. Reach out to any one of us with more questions. Come join us at convention at some of our smaller, more targeted breakout sessions. And Wendy, is there anything else you want to